Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on CBRS. We have Director of Product Management, Matt Mangriotis. Whenever you're ready, Matt, you can take it from here.
Thanks, Olivia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Again, my name is Matt. I'm the Director of Product Management for the point-to-multipoint stuff. We're going to talk today about CBRS and a little bit about what it is and how you might use it with Cambium equipment. It'll probably open up some new business opportunities for a lot of our customers, both existing customers that are using Part 90, as well as some customers that are investigating the band for the first time. So let's get into it. I hope everyone can see okay. But again, let's start out with the fact that we have what we call the CN Medusa technology in the 3 gigahertz band. It's also known as the PMP 450M device. The 450 platform is our kind of flagship platform for point-to-multipoint access layer networks. And if you're familiar with that, then you're probably familiar with it in the 5 gigahertz range, which is kind of the typical unlicensed range, but we also have this available in 3 gigahertz. And it was available in Part 90 under the old 365 rules in the US. And we've gotten grants already that make it available also under Part 96 rules, or the new CBRS rules. So we're really excited about that. And again, adapting the CN Medusa technology allows us to bring massive multi-user MIMO technology into this band and into the CBRS range. Really cool stuff. And actually last night we just won an award, the Chicago Innovation Award for this technology, which is a pretty prestigious award for us, and we're really excited about that. Over the last several years, this has become kind of the de facto standard, really the best innovative product in this space that exists, and nobody can even come close to the capacities and spectral efficiencies we can achieve with this. And really that's due to that multi-user MIMO capability. So with the 3 gigahertz radio here, we do what we call an 8x8 array, or we can speak to up to 4 subscriber modules at the same point in time, achieving really, really high capacities per sector. It's a 90-degree sector, and we can do frequency reuse of 2. So you can really take advantage of that existing spectrum, whatever spectrum you have available to you. And again, this will operate very well under the CBRS rule set as well. And we'll get into the information around that in just a second. There's a solution paper online. I'd encourage you to go and download it if you're not familiar with the technology. It explains kind of how it works and all the really cool benefits that come along with CN Medusa and all the things surrounding it. I'm going to flash the roadmap up here for the 450 platform. It's lots of stuff going on in the platform. We've consistently added features to the platform, really because it's a software-defined platform. We can do lots of cool things. We're not beholden to any standards. We're not based on an ASIC chipset. This is all FPGA and software-defined. So we can do really, really neat things with this. We're introducing some new hardware down the road that will help both the 5 gig and the 3 gig platforms of 450. I'll touch on the new subscriber that's coming out for 3 gigahertz as well. Shortly thereafter, in early next year, we're going to have some really cool software features as well come into the platform that'll really help improve the performance overall. In 3 gigahertz, we're releasing the 450B high gain. It's very similar to what we've done in the 5 gigahertz band, but this will allow you a nice, compact, high gain design with an integrated dish that will really take advantage of the higher power capabilities that are allowed in the 3 gig band under the CBRS rules. So we're excited to get this out the door. We're going to start shipping probably in early January, actually. It looks like we're not going to quite make the December timeframe. So let's get to the heart of CBRS and what that's all about. In quick summary, what it's doing is making 100 new megahertz of spectrum available. So in the past, it was 365 to 370. Now we're able to go all the way down to 355. As I mentioned, all of the hardware in the 450 platform supports that and can allow that frequency as well. It also increases the EIRP limits of the band. When you use the high power, what's known as CBSD category B devices, we can now get up to 47 dBm versus what in the past was a 43 dBm EIRP limit, so we can increase the power available. That'll help with near and non-line of sight connectivity as well. This comes at a little bit of a price in that you have to now leverage a central database or a spectrum access system to coordinate the spectrum usage. That means that every device that comes on air needs to talk to this SAS and ask, hey, can I use this spectrum? And then the SAS will say yes or no, or maybe you have this spectrum available, or maybe you have to turn down your power a little bit to accommodate other interference and things like that. And it's all managed automatically. It's a complex system. We'll get into a little bit of the details around that, but it allows for better sharing of the spectrum. That's the goal of the FCC is to allow the best sharing of this band as possible. The nice thing is that if you're using Cambium or plan to use Cambium, you can start today under Part 90 if you have that license, and it's a relatively easy transition from Part 90 to Part 96. So if you have an existing radio network in Part 90 and you want to move to CBRS, we've got ways to do that within the software that make things easier. There is a cost associated with using this SAS system. You're not paying the FCC, we're paying the SAS operators. And I'll explain that a little more detail, but there is a little bit of a cost to do that. But when you compare to the gains by having 100 new megahertz of spectrum available, as well as the higher power and the ability to use more spectrum, then it's really a minimal cost. Many folks who are familiar with CBRS have seen a slide like this before. Really, it's talking about the opportunity. We're moving from, if you purchase a licensed block of spectrum, it's super expensive and it's usually very, very narrow spectrum, only a little bit. Under Part 90, you were able to use 50 megahertz of spectrum, and so that was the current standard. But now, under the new rules, under Part 96, we can utilize 150 megahertz. So this should open up some additional use cases and some additional spectrum to take better advantage of that. It is a tiered use type of spectrum, which means there are players that have preference to utilize the spectrum ahead of everybody else. So if you start at the top, we have incumbents, and those are the Department of Defense radars, the naval radars, or the fixed satellite Earth stations that are in place. Those are well known. The radars are going to be on the coast, on aircraft carriers, generally speaking. And there are exclusion zones around these, which are known as dynamic protection areas. Along the coast, there'll be a sensing network that the SAS folks operate, and those sensors can, if a radar is detected, they can kick you off of whatever spectrum you're using, and for temporary time, and then they can allow you back on when that naval radar is gone. So that in the past was in a complete exclusion zone from the band, whereas now it's a sensing network that'll tell you when there's a problem and then allow you back on the band when that problem is gone. In many areas, there's going to be what's known as priority access licenses that will be auctioned off. There's a whole set of rules around that. The FCC just released those rules last month. The expectation is that the auction will begin on June 25th of 2020. So until then, there will be no PALs, but after that, there may be PAL licenses granted by county, up to 7 PAL licenses, 7 10 megahertz licenses can be auctioned off per county. And that means that those 70 megahertz will be utilized by the license holder. If they're utilized by the license holder, they have preference to use it. But that also means that at least 80 megahertz of spectrum will always be GAA, or General Authorized Access. And that means anybody can use it. So if you have equipment that can operate under Part 90, then you fall into this GAA category, and you can ask for any amount of spectrum that you want within the 150 megahertz. If there's no PALs in the area or no incumbents in the area, then all 150 megahertz is up for use at any point in time. It's now known as Band 48 in the US. Band 48 is specific to LTE, but it's a defined band under the LTE, TD-LTE rules. Another way to look at it, it's a very similar chart, but it's another way to look at it in that the PALs that you'll notice the yellow bar is only in the lower 100. There will never be a priority license in the upper 50. And also another facet to that upper 50 megahertz, the 365 to 370, is that if you had filed under Part 90, if you had filed for grandfather protection in a given area, if you had registered your device prior to April of 2015, then you're welcome to incumbent status within that upper 50 megahertz until your license expires. Very useful for some folks. A lot of folks, that was a long time ago in 2015, so a lot of folks hadn't done that. There will be a lot of areas where that does not really apply. But if you had, then there's an option to have certainly the incumbent status for a period of time. Now, most folks' licenses expire April of 2020. Most folks' Part 90 licenses expire April of 2020. So what that means is that you'll have to do something with all of that Part 90 equipment by that time. Now, will the FCC come knocking on your door in May of 2020 to tell you to turn it off? Probably not. However, if you're interfering with someone with that equipment, there's a likely chance that this will raise some eyebrows, and there may be some kind of cease and desist. There may be some kind of letters. There will be some kind of enforcement, we're told, from the FCC side of using Part 90 equipment beyond the expiration of the license date. Just keep that in mind. So Cambium Network strategy around this is that we are partnering with all of the major SaaS vendors to provide this service. We're partnering with Federated, with Google, and then soon with CommScope. All three of those are the major SaaS providers. There is another one, Amdocs, and actually there's a fifth one called Sony, but we're not engaged with them. So you have your choice. If you use Cambium equipment, you have your choice of which SaaS to operate with. We will utilize CN Maestro, our management system, as a kind of the messaging back and forth between the SaaS and the radio equipment themselves. That's known as a domain proxy, but CN Maestro is the tool, the front end tool that we use to make that communication path. As I mentioned, 450M is being deployed in great numbers around the US right now. It's being looked upon as kind of the major capacity that you can achieve. No other product that we found does better than that. And the complete 3 gigahertz portfolio is capable now of migrating to CBRS. So as I mentioned, you can continue to operate Part 90 if you're already operating a network, no problem. And you can gracefully migrate over to Part 96 as necessary. Talk about things in terms of timing in just a moment, but there is a lot of hype around LTE in this band. Most folks, when they hear about CBRS, they say, well, that's an LTE band. Isn't that the only thing you can use in that band? The answer is no. Cambium Networks has written into the WinForum rules the Cambium technology is one of the allowed protocols in the band. That actually Cambium is the only technology that's not 3GPP recognized or not a standard that's written into these rules and allowed in the band, which is kind of a unique position that we're in here. But it's great because it allows us to take this software-defined technology called CN Medusa and apply it to this band. We believe we have a lot of advantages when it comes to capacity, spectral efficiency, interference tolerance. A lot of different facets of the network are in fact better than what you can find in LTE equipment. Now, if you look at the LTE standard, of course, the LTE standard talks about all these great things, but really when the rubber hits the road or when you implement those great things into a product at a cost that you can afford, you'll see that the 450 Medusa product actually exceeds all of your expectations when you compare it to what's available in the LTE space. And there's a little white paper discussing this, again, on our website, easily found if you search for 450 LTE on our resource page. So take a look and read that. It's a very short but interesting read on how we compare to LTE. So what's the next steps, or what do you want to do going forward here? ICD, which is known as the initial commercial deployment, started in September. It ended or is ending at the end of this month here. It was the period where the SaaS vendors, the big three that I mentioned, and probably Amdocs as well, were collecting data from actual live networks on the CBRS band. They're collecting data as the kind of the trial period. They are now in the process of compiling their reports on all the data they collected. We did participate in ICD with a few customers, so we are on board. We're running and operating right now in CBRS with a few customers. And after they collect their data and submit their reports to the FCC, there will be a review period where the FCC is going to review all this data and make sure that we're kind of ready for go. And during that period, we can take on additional customers and put them on CBRS as on a trial basis. And this is prior to kind of charging for the service and that sort of thing. So we are interested in supporting that for a fair number of customers. If you're interested in that, please, you can send me an email and we can talk about how we get you started on that. That's expected to last maybe a month, maybe a month and a half or so. They're expecting to kind of turn on full commercial deployment sometime in December, but perhaps that'll slip out to January. Maybe it'll be a kind of a new year type of thing. That's up to the FCC. But in this interim period, we are happy to get you going and kind of fill you in on how it works and get you started testing it to see if you are comfortable doing it. And again, we have a good plan to migrate the 450 networks over to Part 96. So if that's of interest to you, there will be some training around this that we're going to capture and kind of modularize. And we'll have that available online, hopefully before the end of the year. That's the goal. And then you can kind of watch and see how this works in lieu of actually doing it if you want to do that. The first step, though, to doing any of this is what they call CPI training. CPI stands for Certified Professional Installer. It's a requirement for every device that's installed in Part 96 must have CPI accreditation. Someone who is a CPI or a certified CPI must sign off, if you will, on every installation. There's a webinar here that Richard did. Richard was hired by WISPA, the association in the US, the WISP association, to kind of gather this information. He actually sits on the WIN forum for the CPI training. He kind of manages all of the accreditation for the TPAs or the authorities around the training. And there are certification courses offered by each of the major SASs. So you can go online and take any of these. They're typically about $600. I think some of them are on sale right now for a little bit less. It's about a day of the course, put aside a day to do this, and then you have to take a test and pass it, and then you're accredited, or you're good for 5 years to be a CPI installer. So someone in your organization or someone you hire must have the CPI training before you can even get started deploying these devices. So I know I went through a lot of information very quickly. I hope it was helpful, and I'd like to open it up for Q&A at this time. Feel free to ask anything. I'm looking in the question box right now. Let me see if I can make it a little bigger. So I didn't talk in great detail about the process of actually getting radios on air. It is not super easy. One of the questions is, how do you do this SM to AP or SM to base station handshake? There is a method that's defined by WinForum in terms of how to do this. It involves sending not user data, but kind of pilot tones and beaconing over the air at power levels to establish the link between the SM and the AP. And we are following that process. So the RSMs, once the base station is up and transmitting, meaning it has its grant for Part 96, then an SM can come online. It can beacon and establish the link, at which time it'll ask for its grant. And then typically what normally happens is that it needs to go through this SAS to SAS communication, which happens in the middle of the night. So normally this would take about 24-hour period before that SM can come on air. We've got some methods that we believe will short circuit that time frame. And so in the training that we develop, we'll talk about how that works exactly. But yes, that's there are some rules around how that will happen. So it's a complex, more complex structure, but certainly it's going to be figured out before too long, and probably streamlined a little bit before too long. Another question that's come in is, it says, do I have a feel for how willing the SAS will be to grant the higher EIRP? So the EIRP limits are there to protect. Really, it's similar to the 5 gig band, where it's there to protect against unnecessary interference. If there is no interference generated, and the SASs are what's calculating that interference, if there's no interference generated to other players of the band, then it'll grant as high an EIRP as allowed. And so that, I think that'll be the case, at least initially, in almost everywhere. As the band becomes saturated with players, I think we'll see some of the power being turned down in certain areas to protect against undue interference to other users of the band. That's kind of how it's going to work. I think we'll see a lot of learning as we get going here. But really, it's about turning it on and getting people in the band at the beginning here. Those are the only questions I've seen so far. I don't see anything in chat. There's a couple more coming in. This is a good question. Do we need a separate instance of CN Maestro specifically for this band? No. If you're already using CN Maestro, then this simply rolls into the Maestro that you're using. It can be on-premise, it can be the cloud version. Either one will connect to the domain proxy. If you're not using CN Maestro, at this time you will need to implement CN Maestro. At least you'll need to register or get an account going and register and onboard all of the access points at a very minimum. There's really no reason not to onboard all of your devices, but the access points are what actually controls the messaging. So at a very minimum, you'll need to onboard that all the access points in the 3 gig space before that you can even ask for a grant to operate in the band. But yeah, that's a very good question. Any plans for CBRS with EPMP? Some folks on the phone may or may not know we have another multi-point product line called EPMP. It's our kind of more economical product line. It does not support 3 gigahertz at this time. There are no plans at this time to do anything in 3 gigahertz with EPMP, so no. So a question on the process, the actual process from migrating to from part 90 to part 96. That'll be covered in the training that we have out there. Really, it amounts to having your radios be onboarded and in Maestro, and then enabling CBRS within the radio system and Maestro, and then it'll offer you the grant, and then you can switch over. It's pretty simple to do, and we'll lead you through that during that training. Good question here coming. Some phones, some handsets are now including CBRS chipsets, meaning that, like, for instance, the Samsung S10 and the iPhone 11, they have CBRS capable Qualcomm chipsets in them. Will they be able to connect to a 450 network also operating on CBRS? The answer is no. That's where kind of the LTE protocol or LTE ecosystem kind of fits into this a little bit differently. There are several applications for indoor, enterprise, large venue type of deployments that will be relying on LTE protocol chipsets to make those connections to UE handsets that support it. Such as, you know, the Samsungs and the Apples. We're not intending here to cover those kinds of use cases. Our use case here with the 450 platform is strictly fixed wireless deployments, and it's using the Cambium proprietary protocol, which means it's really about the fixed wireless offering that we have already. So we didn't talk about CN Ranger either today. specifically because it's not going to be available until about mid next year. I will definitely be talking about that on future webinars. We have a product called CN Ranger that is coming out that will be utilizing LTE protocols. We're excited about that product as well. But for now, the offering that we have in the CBRS space is the 450 platform equipment. So we'll cover CN Ranger in a future webinar. So there's a question about EPMP performance, and let me see if I can. It's a little bit long. It says I hear multi-user MIMO is impacted by multipath. So again, multi-user MIMO functions best in line of sight, as does any wireless connection. There are things built into the protocol and the algorithms to help with near and non-line of sight. It performs admirably well against even competing LTE solutions, and so we know that LTE has a lot of cool things built into the protocol that help with near and non-line of sight. It was a mobile standard that was adapted to fixed wireless here, and it does some really neat things. So if you get a certain number of trees or a certain deployment of trees that is just too much for the protocol to handle, yeah, LTE may function a little bit better still than the 450, but because of that, the power that's allowed, we're now able to overcome a lot of that. So we've gotten reports from folks that are using this kind of side by side with LTE and seeing very good results. So there's lots of different evidence to support that. Is there a process in place for providers to bid on the available spectrum? Yes, there is. The FCC just released the rulemaking for that auction. It's called Auction 105. If you do a Google search for FCC Auction 105, you'll find an instructional PDF that talks about all of the associated goings on with that auction that's going to occur next year. It's pretty important that you read up on that. You probably, if you're unfamiliar with the FCC auction process, you probably do want to engage a lawyer who is familiar with that. It's probably a good idea, unless you don't have to. It's not in the rules that you have to engage a lawyer, but there may be some benefit to doing that. So I would encourage you to at least read the instructions that the FCC has released. Again, it's called Auction 105 is going to be the CBRS PAL auctions. There's a tack-on question to that. It says, is it first come, first serve? And if you're talking about the spectrum use, it is not first come, first serve. It is shared, always shared. So if you are, squatting on all 150 megahertz of this, you will be forced to share it if a new player comes in and tries to use some. And so the SAS can actually decrease the amount of spectrum that you're using. It can decrease your power. It can do a lot of different things. So that's all up to the SAS as far as that goes. Question is, does the 3 gigahertz license provide for both CBRS and LTE usage? I'm not sure what the meaning of that is, as CBRS is the band itself. LTE is simply a way to transport data on that band. It's a protocol. LTE is kind of, the 450 platform is a proprietary protocol. LTE is a different protocol. Both of them can be used within CBRS to transport data. The 3 gigahertz license just means you have access to the band. There is no license for CBRS. You're utilizing Part 96 approved equipment to talk to the database. So it's not a licensed band. You don't need a Part 90 license. You don't need any license, but you need to use equipment that's certified. And so they kind of call it a quasi-licensed band. But you no longer need to register equipment with the ULS in the FCC database like you did with the old Part 90. It's simply using this the SAS system. There's a request for a webinar on Medusa and beamforming. We have some of that available already on the forums. So if you do some searching on our user forums, you'll see old past webinars talking about Medusa beamforming and all the capabilities that Medusa can do. There's all kinds of information on there and slides and things. If you can't find what you're looking for, you can send me an email and I'll point you in the right direction. My email for everyone is matt@cambiumnetworks.com, M-A-T-T. So if you need something, just shoot me an email. I'll help you. Is CN Heat compatible with CBRS band? That's a great question. So CN Heat, for everyone else who may not know, is one of our newly introduced planning tools. CN Heat will help you deploy networks in places that you know you can get coverage. It's a really, really accurate clutter data, like 1 meter LiDAR data, and it's a network planning tool that'll help you in a given site determine where you can achieve coverage. Right now, CN Heat is only line of sight. It does not handle near and non-line of sight, although we are working on that. So today we can do 5 gigahertz line of sight. We can do 3 gigahertz, which includes CBRS, line of sight. If you have a non-line of sight situation or a near line of sight situation where you're impacted by trees and such, we are working on the modeling for that. It's a much trickier proposition, but we are certainly working on it. I don't have a date yet when we'll have that available, but that is something we're trying to do. That's all the questions I see. Thank you for the lively question and answer session. I appreciate that. If you have any more, again, matt@cambiumnetworks.com. I can follow up with you. Please visit the forums. There's tons of information on there. There's actually a CBRS section. Feel free to ask questions there as well, because then everyone gets the benefit of seeing the answers. Thanks very much. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks, Matt. We'll have this recording and slides available on YouTube and our online community. Thank you for joining today and have a good day.